Before you toss that tangle of old earrings into the donation bag, stop. One pair sitting in the back of a drawer, the pair you forgot you even owned, could be worth thousands of dollars. Here are 10 old earrings that collectors are quietly paying a fortune for, and there is a real chance you already own one. Number 10, Sarah Coventry rhinestone earrings. I want to open with this one because it is the brand people dismiss the fastest, and that is exactly why it deserves the top spot on this list. Sarah Coventry launched in 1949 and grew into one of the largest costume jewelry companies in America, sold not in stores, but through home parties, which means it ended up in an almost unbelievable number of households. Here's the part most people never stop to consider. Because the pieces were mass-produced by the millions, the average pair really is worth very little, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. But a small number of early lines, the ones made before the company started cutting corners in the 1970s, used heavier settings, prong-set stones, and genuine Austrian crystal instead of the cheaper glass that came later. Collectors specifically hunt the earlier Sarah Cov and Emmons crossover pieces, along with a handful of limited runs that were only sold for a single season before being pulled. Common pairs will bring you $5 or $10 and nothing more, but those early, heavier, correctly marked pieces can climb into the $150 to $300 range when the stones are intact, and the pattern is one collectors are actively chasing. Turn the earring over and look for the early oval Sarah Coventry stamp, rather than the later flat script logo. That detail alone can be the difference between a garage sale throwaway and a pair worth real money. And here is the part collectors rarely say out loud because it works against them. Because Sarah Coventry pieces were sold at home parties rather than in department stores, nobody at the time treated them as anything worth preserving, which means far fewer of the early runs survive compared to brands people always assumed were the valuable ones. Number 9, Corocraft Duet convertible earrings. If your grandmother ever owned a brooch that seemed to split apart into 2 smaller pieces, there's a good chance it started life connected to a matching pair of earrings. And that connection is exactly why this entry matters. Coro, later stamped Corocraft, built an entire design language around mechanical cleverness. Hinges, clips, and fittings that let one piece of jewelry serve 2 or 3 purposes. That kind of engineering took real tooling and real skill, and it is a large part of why these pieces still feel substantial in the hand today. Here's the honest breakdown. A plain, unsigned Coro pair with no mechanism will bring you $20 to $40 on a good day, and plenty of sellers will not tell you that up front. But a correctly signed Corocraft Duet set, especially the full trio of brooch plus matching convertible earrings, regularly sells in the $300 to $600 range. And rare figural sets shaped like birds or flowers have crossed $1,000 at auction. And what you are looking for is the word Corocraft, not the plainer Coro stamp, along with visible pin mechanisms or clipbacks that show genuine jeweler's engineering rather than a single stamped piece of metal. If the set is still together, do not separate it, because a matched trio is worth dramatically more than the pieces sold apart. Sellers who break up a complete duet set to move it faster online almost always end up with less money total than they would have made keeping the trio whole. Number 8, Hobe handset filigree earrings. This is the one that quietly breaks my heart when I see it treated carelessly, because almost nobody builds jewelry this way anymore. William Hobe founded his company in the 1920s and insisted his craftsmen train the same way jewelers making real gold and platinum pieces did, using filigree work, hand-wired settings, and layered metals that were never meant to be cheap. The company advertised itself for decades as jewels of legendary splendor, and that was not empty marketing. Pick up a genuine Hobe piece and look at the back. You will often see open-backed stones, intricate metalwork, and a weight that feels closer to fine jewelry than costume jewelry. Now, the honest numbers, because they matter here. A simple common Hobe pair will bring $40 to $80, which is respectable but not life-changing. But the ornate filigree lines from the 1940s and 1950s, especially anything with colored art glass stones or a matching brooch, regularly sell in the $200 to $500 range, and exceptional documented pieces have sold well above that at specialty auctions. Look for the signature stamped directly into the filigree rather than on a flat tag, since the earliest and most valuable pieces were marked that way. The delicate earrings your family called too fussy to wear might be exactly the pieces serious collectors are searching for right now. And unlike a lot of costume jewelry from the same decades, Hobe pieces tend to hold up far better physically because the metalwork underneath the stones was never designed to be disposable in the first place. Number 7, Moonglow lucite earrings. Now we reach the entry that sounds almost absurd until you actually see the prices, because I am telling you that old plastic earrings can genuinely outsell gold-plated jewelry. Lucite was developed in the 1930s, and jewelry makers quickly discovered that layering pearlescent pigment beneath a clear or frosted dome created an eerie, glowing effect collectors now call Moonglow. Families treated this jewelry as cheap costume fluff for decades, which is precisely why so much of it was thrown away, and why the survivors now command real money. On the collector market today, Moonglow lucite earrings start around $40, average closer to $150, and the rarest color combinations and shapes have sold for $400 or more. Plastic. Sit with that for a second. Color and glow decide almost everything with this material. Confetti lucite, with tiny flecks of color suspended inside the piece, and the true Moonglow pieces with that deep inner shimmer are the ones collectors chase hardest, while plain clear or opaque pairs sit much closer to the bottom of that range. Here's a simple test you can run tonight. Hold the earrings up to a bright light and tilt them slowly. Genuine Moonglow lucite seems to hold its own inner light source, almost like it is glowing from somewhere inside the plastic itself, and that effect cannot be faked with modern acrylic. Shape matters too. The oversized teardrop and dome designs from the 1950s tend to sell for far more than small, simple studs, simply because the glow effect is so much more dramatic across a larger surface. Number 6, vintage Christian Dior earrings. This is one of the categories where the name on the back can multiply the value of the piece by 10 times or more. In the 1950s, Christian Dior licensed its jewelry production to specialist manufacturers rather than making pieces in-house, and those manufacturers were instructed to use the same quality of stone setting and finishing the house demanded of its couture gowns. That means a lot of genuinely fine costume jewelry construction ended up wearing the Dior name, and a lot of it ended up forgotten in ordinary jewelry boxes because it never looked flashy enough to seem important. Let me give you the real range. A later, mass-produced Dior pair from the 1980s or 1990s will typically bring $60 to $120, which is still solid money for costume jewelry. But the earlier pieces, especially anything made during the 1950s licensing period with the earliest style of signature, regularly sell in the $300 to $800 range. And complete matching parures with a necklace, bracelet, and earrings together have sold for well over $1,000. Check the clasp style and the exact wording of the signature, since the earliest Dior marks differ noticeably from the later, simpler script. If your family ever traveled or shopped somewhere upscale in the 1950s, it is worth checking that jewelry box twice. Even a chipped or slightly discolored stone will not necessarily kill the value here, since collectors are often paying for the history in the signature as much as they are paying for flawless condition. Number 5, unsigned Art Deco marcasite earrings. This is the entry hiding in more jewelry boxes than almost any other on this list, and it is my favorite because it rewards the person who actually bothers to look closely. Marcasite jewelry. Small faceted pieces of pyrite set closely together to mimic the sparkle of cut steel was enormously popular through the 1920s and 1930s, and the best of it was made in sterling silver with genuine handset stones. Here is the twist. An enormous amount of this jewelry was never signed at all because small workshops across Europe produced it in huge quantities for export, and paper tags identifying the maker were thrown away decades ago. Collectors have learned to identify quality from construction rather than a signature. Flip the earring over and look at how the tiny stones are set. Genuine early marcasite work uses individual prongs or beading around each stone with a slightly uneven, handmade quality to the settings, rather than the glued, perfectly uniform look of later reproductions. Look also for a sterling stamp on the poster clip, since the finest pieces were never made in cheap base metal. I will be honest with you, because it keeps this list credible. Common later marcasite pairs bring only $10 to $20, but genuine sterling, handset Art Deco marcasite earrings in good condition regularly sell for $150 to $400, and elaborate drop designs with colored accent stones have sold for considerably more. It is worth repeating that the absence of a signature is not a red flag with this category the way it would be with most other jewelry. It is simply how the market worked in that particular era. But before we get to the top 3, there is something most people never realize about valuable jewelry in general. Some of the most valuable pieces do not look expensive at all. In fact, a huge number of them end up in donation piles, estate sales, and forgotten drawers simply because their owners assumed they were old-fashioned or unfashionable. Appearance has almost nothing to do with actual value. What matters are the details most people never think to check, things like purity stamps, maker's marks, the stone construction, and the small production clues that separate an ordinary-looking piece from one worth real money. Once you start noticing those details, you will never judge a piece of jewelry by how it looks sitting in the box again. Keep that in mind as we move through the rest of this list, because the next few entries prove exactly that. Now, back to the countdown. Number 4, Mexican silver Taxco earrings. For much of the last century, tourists traveling through Mexico brought home little silver earrings from the town of Taxco as inexpensive souvenirs, wore them a handful of times, and dropped them in a drawer without a second thought. That casual habit is exactly why so many genuinely important pieces are sitting forgotten in ordinary homes today. In the 1930s and 1940s, American silversmith William Spratling moved to Taxco and trained a generation of local craftsmen in a modern design style that blended pre-Columbian motifs with clean, sculptural silverwork. And workshops like Los Castillo carried that tradition forward for decades afterward. Here are the real numbers from working dealers. Ordinary unsigned Taxco silver earrings sell for $25 to $50, which is fair but unremarkable. Pieces signed by Spratling himself or by the workshops he trained regularly bring $200 to $600, and documented early Spratling designs have sold for well over $1,000 at specialty auction houses. Look for a signature stamped into the silver along with a numbered hallmark reading 925, which indicates sterling purity, since many of the finest workshops use that mark specifically to separate their work from lower quality tourist jewelry. If your parents or grandparents ever traveled through Mexico, that jewelry box deserves a second, closer look tonight. Even pieces missing an original stone can still carry meaningful value here, since it is the silverwork and the signature doing most of the work, not the decoration sitting on top. Number 3, antique solid gold Victorian earrings. This is the least glamorous entry I will put on this entire list, and it might be the most quietly profitable one for whoever is watching right now. So forget style completely for the next minute. Gold is trading at historically high levels today, and most people have simply not caught up mentally with what that means for old jewelry sitting in a drawer. A pair of Victorian-era 10 or 14 karat gold earrings, the ones your family considers too old-fashioned to ever wear again, can carry several $100s in pure melt value based on nothing except their weight. They do not need to be pretty. They do not even need to be complete, because broken clasps, missing posts, and single earrings all melt down exactly the same as a perfect pair. Reputable gold buyers typically pay between 70 and 90% of true melt value, and on heavier antique pieces that spread adds up fast. Weigh the earrings at home on a kitchen scale, check the carat stamp, and look up the current melt value yourself before you ever walk into a shop. Get quotes from at least 3 separate buyers, because the first offer is almost never the best one, and a surprising number of buyers count on you never checking the math yourself. It genuinely does not matter if the design is decades out of style or if a stone fell out somewhere along the way. None of that changes what the raw gold itself is worth. Number 2, Georgian rose-cut diamond earrings. This is where family assumptions become genuinely expensive. If you have inherited old diamond earrings and the stones look strangely flat on top, slightly uneven, and lack the sharp, brilliant sparkle of a modern diamond, do not assume they are cheap or damaged, because you may be looking at rose-cut diamonds shaped entirely by hand well over a century ago. Rose cutting largely disappeared once modern, brilliant cutting techniques took over in the early 20th century, which means the cut itself no longer exists in new production. Since it cannot be recreated the same way today, the market treats surviving examples as genuinely rare rather than simply old. Georgian and early Victorian rose-cut diamond earrings start around $300 for modest examples, average closer to $4,000, and the finest documented pairs have sold for well over $60,000 at major auction houses. Those top figures are not guaranteed for every pair, but even ordinary antique examples routinely land solidly in the thousands. For decades, families brought these earrings to jewelers to have the stones recut into modern shapes to make them look more fashionable, and every single one of those recuts destroyed the antique value permanently. The strange, old-fashioned sparkle your family found unimpressive is precisely what serious collectors now pay a premium to find untouched. If you suspect you own a pair like this, resist the urge to have anything cleaned, polished, or adjusted until an antique specialist has actually seen them in person. Number 1, natural pearl earrings. And here's where everything on this list comes together, because the most valuable earrings you could own are also the ones that look the most ordinary sitting in a drawer. And a single laboratory test is what separates a pleasant keepsake from a life-changing sale. Almost every pearl sold over the past century is cultured, meaning a farmer deliberately started the growth process inside the oyster. But if your earrings date from before the 1920s, there's a genuine chance the pearls formed entirely on their own in the wild, with no human involvement at all. And that single fact changes everything about their worth. Cultured pearl earrings typically range from a couple $100s up to $20,000 for the very finest examples. Natural pearl earrings start around $600 and can climb past $100,000, and they have become so scarce that they rarely appear in ordinary jewelry stores anymore, surfacing instead in estate collections, museum holdings, and major auction sales. Here is the warning that keeps this honest, because I have seen this mistake happen too many times. Most inherited pearls turn out to be early cultured pearls, and secondhand cultured pearls without a major maker's name are frankly not worth very much at all. You cannot tell the difference by eye, and neither can a pawnshop counter. The only reliable way to know is an X-ray examination at a proper gemological laboratory, and that test costs only a small fraction of what a genuine natural pearl is actually worth. The plain little pearl drops nobody in your family ever thought twice about might quietly be the single most valuable thing your family owns. And the only way anyone will ever find out is by taking the time to check. So before any of those earrings go into a donation bag or a garage sale box, take 5 minutes, flip everything over,